Hey everybody, today's video is a little bit different. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about a song from the Beatles album Revolver. In this case, it's the song Taxman, which is the first song on side 1 written by George Harrison. But today, instead of talking about specific pressings or anything like that, I want to talk about the instruments that were used on the song Taxman. Now, when it comes to finding out what instruments the Beatles were using during whatever sessions, there is an amazing book that I think is one of the best Beatle books around, and it is this book called Beatles Gear. Beatles Gear is hands down one of my go-to books that is just an amazing look at the Beatles instruments that they used. Now, if you're a Beatle nerd like me, knowing what instruments the Beatles owned during their time as a band, it's just endlessly fascinating, and this is the book to have. It's written by Andy Babuk. I believe that's how you say his last name. I could be completely wrong, but that's my best guess there. But he really went just did insane amounts of research, even down to trying to figure out what strings they used, certain particular knobs they had on their guitars. He went just so intense as far as his research, and he really did a great job. And this is an excellent book to have in your Beatle collection. Now, even if you're not a musician and you don't really care about guitars, this book is still, I think, an essential read for any Beatle fan, because it gives kind of like a different way of telling the Beatles story. And it's still a fascinating read, even if you're not a musician and you don't care about guitars. It's still excellent. So for this video, I used this book to try to figure out what instruments were being used on the song Taxman. Now, I also used another book that I think is great. It's this book called Looking Through You, Rare and Unseen Photographs from the Beatles Book Archive. Now, the Beatles book was a monthly magazine type book, and the Beatles gave full access to the photographers from the Beatles Monthly to come to their recording sessions, some of their live shows, but in this case, recording sessions, and take a lot of photos. And there are some excellent photos from the Revolver sessions in this book. A lot of photos that eventually ended up in the Super Deluxe Edition book that I'll also be talking about. But this has just an endless amount of great photographic evidence of some of the Beatles recording sessions that really helps you see what instruments they were using at specific sessions and what instruments were just laying around as well. Excellent book. So I highly recommend this as well. And speaking of the book that comes from the Super Deluxe Edition box set, here it is right here. Now, in this book, Kevin Howlett, who is the main writer of most of all the Beatles' new box sets and stuff, he does his best to try to figure out who's playing what on all the songs on Revolver. Now, I think he does a pretty good job. There are some instances in here where he attributes certain Beatles to certain parts that I kind of question. And there's also times where he, I think, leaves out certain Beatles that maybe did have a more of a major part in the recording. But anyway, all he's basing it off of course, are the original session tapes, which he's been able to listen to and try to figure out, well, obviously that's Paul playing bass, obviously that's George playing tambourine, something like that, because, on the recording, on the outtakes, you can hear probably specific Beatles talking about their part or whatever. So he's definitely doing the best he can, and I did use this as some of my reference as well, and there are also great photos in here from the sessions. So this is a great book that I used. And then finally, I went back to this book that I talked about in some of my previous videos. This is a book called The Beatles Recording Reference Manual, written by Jerry Hammack. This happens to be volume 2. It covers the Help album all the way through the Revolver album. And I mentioned this before as well with this book. There are some things in here that I think are not quite accurate, but generally speaking, I think that this author gets a lot of things correct in here. And I also mentioned that this is a very it's not like a normal book you would sit down and read from beginning to end. It's definitely a reference manual, very, very clinical, but it has some great information, and I definitely use this as well when trying to figure out what instruments the Beatles used on specifically this song, Taxman. So, let's now get to the exact point of this video, which is talking about the instruments used on the song Taxman. So let's first start off with the song's author, George Harrison. So George, on this song, plays, obviously, guitar, and he sings lead. And in the Beatles book that came with this box set, they have some beautiful, beautiful photos, and I will show you the page for Taxman once I get to it here. Here is the page for Taxman, and I love the tape box on there. I can't get enough of that, and the original lyrics written by George in George's writing. But in this book, like I said, they do list who plays what. Now for George, here's what they list: lead vocal, backing vocal, lead, and rhythm guitar. Now, lead guitar, he's not playing the famous guitar solo because, as I'm sure most Beatle fans know, that is Paul McCartney playing the guitar solo, and we will be talking about that soon. But George is playing some lead guitar. He's definitely playing the rhythm guitar, so all those guitar stabs during the verses and stuff, that's definitely George. And he's also playing that lead part, which is the main riff, I'll call it, which is the bassist playing that main riff as well. And that comes up, I believe, in like the second or third verse, where he just is doubling the bass riff, basically. So that's definitely George as well. Now, trying to figure out what guitars George is using on this song can be a little difficult, and I just want to put out a disclaimer here and just say that I don't claim to know exactly what any of the Beatles are playing on this song, Taxman. I'm just using my best guesstimation based on the information that I have in these books and the photographic evidence and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just doing my best to guess here. Now, in this book, one thing I really respect about this author, Jerry Hammack, is that he clearly states that he is, just like I said, he's just doing his best guesstimation as to what the Beatles are doing on their particular sessions, as far as like what amps they're using, guitars they're using, who's doing what. He's just trying to do his best guesstimation. So I really appreciate that. And in this book, he lists for each of the members, and this is the song Taxman, of course, that we're talking about. He talks about George here. Now I'm going to read from this book. The backing track features Harrison on one of 3 electric guitars he had in circulation at the time. So I love that right away. He's just stating that there were 3 electric guitars that are known that George owned in 1966 during the Revolver sessions. He goes on to list them. First off, a 1961 Fender Stratocaster with a synchronized tremolo. That's just a whammy barb. Also available to him was a 1964 Gibson SG Standard, and that's one of my favorite guitars, by the way. And this is a guitar that George definitely used a lot during the Revolver sessions. And he also had available to him a 1965 Epiphone ES230 TD, which I believe is just the Epiphone Casino that George and John both had. Now, when it comes to Taxman, though, and as far as what the parts George plays on this song, I believe he's playing his Fender Stratocaster. Now, this Fender Stratocaster is a 1961 Fender Stratocaster, and at the time, in 1966, it was the color Sonic Blue. This is a specific color that Fender gave to their instruments, and this is a Sonic Blue Fender Stratocaster. And a little bit of a backstory on this. During the Help sessions, John and George both wanted to get some Stratocasters to use, Fender Stratocasters, during the Help sessions. So they sent out their roadie Mal Evans to pick some up. Brian Epstein, their manager, said he would pay for them if they got identical guitars. And I'm sure he was thinking in terms of if they play them on stage, it'll look good if they have identical guitars. So Mal went out to a music store, came back with these 2 Fender Stratocasters, identical in Sonic Blue. And John used his during the Help sessions, but then after that, didn't really use it all that much anymore. It does show up a few more times. I think he used it during the Sgt. Pepper sessions as well. But then after that, it kind of faded away. George, on the other hand, used his a lot. From all the way from the Help sessions all the way until the very end of his recording career in like the late 90s. Of course, he later went on to paint this guitar and rename it Rocky, and famously used during the All You Need Is Love broadcast and Natural Mystery Tour. But during this time in '66, it was just its standard blue color, sonic blue. And there are some photographs of George during the Revolver sessions. Unfortunately, they're all with his back to the camera. But you can clearly see he's playing a Fender, and it's obviously a Fender Stratocaster. And in my opinion, these photos might even be from when they were recording Taxman. So if I had to put my money on it, I'm going to say that George is playing his 1962, or 61 Sonic Blue Fender Stratocaster on Taxman. So that's what I'm going to say that George is playing. Now let's move on to Paul. So on this song, Paul is also playing lead guitar, famously the guitar solo. And for the guitar solo on this, McCartney's Syrian guitar solo played on his 1962 Epiphone ES-230TD Casino, so the Epiphone Casino. Now this guitar was a guitar that Paul still owns to this day, or not was, he still owns this guitar to this day. He plays it, he's been recently playing it live a lot, which is very, very cool. And this is the guitar he definitely plays the solo on Taxman. And there are some great photos of Paul playing this guitar during the Revolver sessions. And in my opinion, this is one of Paul's best guitar solos ever. He has played a lot of excellent guitar solos. He's obviously known for his bass work, but I think he's a fantastic guitar player as well. And this is just an amazing solo that really comes out of nowhere, in my opinion. Before this, none of the Beatles guitar solos had ever sounded anything like this, and it's just absolutely on fire, is what I would say. So Paul is for sure playing his Epiphone Casino for this guitar solo, and it's just an amazing piece of work. Now Paul is also playing bass on this song, and for bass he is playing his Rickenbacker bass, and specifically, let's see what it's a 1964 Rickenbacker 4001S. Now, this was given to Paul I believe they tried to first give it to him in 1964, but he didn't actually end up acquiring the bass until '65, and he started using it on the Rubber Soul sessions. And he, of course, like a lot of the Beatles guitars, he ended up painting this bass later on for the All You Need Is Love broadcast, and he also used it in the Hello Goodbye video, in the Natural Mystery Tour. But at this time, in 1966, it had a fire glow finish. And I'll show you a photo of that right here. Now, this Rickenbacker bass really defined Paul's bass sound from 1960, basically 65, when he used it during Rubber Soul, but specifically 66 onward. Paul used the Rickenbacker on almost all of the Beatles' remaining albums. He used other basses as well. He had like a Fender Jazz bass. He would go back to his Hofner as well. But generally speaking, the Rickenbacker was his main bass. And on Taxman, it has a really defining bass sound. It sounds so fantastic, just so punchy, and no one played bass like Paul in the 1960s. Total innovator, and just an amazing bass tone. And you got to give some credit again to Jeff Emmerich, who I talked about in my last video. Jeff Emmerich, he captured Paul's bass in an amazing way. Now, that leaves John. So what did John do on Taxman? Well, obviously he's singing backing vocals with Paul and George as well. But did he play any instruments on this song? Now, according to this book right here, John did not play guitar on Taxman. And from what I can gather here, it seems that the backing track just featured Paul, George, and Ringo. And I think maybe John was playing tambourine or something like that. That's the vibe I would go with, that John was playing tambourine. Now, in the Beatles book that comes with the Super Deluxe edition, Kevin Hallett seems to think that John was only singing backing vocals on Taxman. And maybe that's true because, of course, he has access to the original master tapes, so maybe he's hearing something that I'm not aware of. But on here, he lists John as just singing backing vocals. So I guess for this, I'm going to say that John didn't play guitar on Taxman, and the guitars are just George and Paul on bass. Now for drums, of course, we can't forget about Ringo. Ringo is playing one of his Ludwig drum kits, and I'll show you a picture of that here. Of course, Ringo owned a lot of Ludwig kits throughout his career, and I don't know if we can specifically pinpoint the exact kit he's using during these Revolver sessions, because he had a couple of kits to choose from, and he probably mixed and matched as well, like a lot of drummers do. He probably used a different snare from a different set with a different bass drum and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of hard to know, but we can for sure count on the fact that Ringo is playing a Ludwig drum set. So those are the instruments that were being used on Taxman, and it is one of George's best songs, in my opinion, and one of the best Beatles songs, and certainly the perfect opening song for the album Revolver. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope, like me, you are as fascinated about the Beatle instruments as I am, because I think they are one of the coolest aspects of the Beatles story, because they used some very, very interesting instruments that influenced a lot of people. And yeah, it was fun for me to make a video like this because it's just a little bit different. I love still talking about specific pressings and specific aspects of their recording career, but talking about their instruments is a fun little sidetrack for me as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd love to know in the comments below if you agree with all of my assessments as far as what instruments were used, and that's it for now. So take care, and bye for now.